born prematurely, they miss out on that whole experience. So they don't have the same compression and the resistance exercise that full-term babies do. So when our babies are preterm, we have to expect that they are going to show some differences in strength and in movement. So our newborns should have physiologic flexion. They should just kind of rubber band right back into that flexed hip, flexed elbow. They should have their hands sort of tightly coupled to their body. Unless they're on their backs, then gravity is probably going to pull their arms out to the side, but you're going to still see elbow flexion. So if you pull out a newborn's arm like this and you let go, they should sort of rubber band back into this position. They're not going to hold it out here or flop back onto the surface. They should move back into a flexed position. There's sort of like a kind of rubber band feeling to a newborn. It's common for babies, typical newborn babies, to have an up to 30-degree hip flexion contracture, and that's considered normal. So because those hips have never been in extension, we don't expect them to suddenly have extension when they're born. So those hips should be flexed more than 30 degrees when they're at rest, but even if you try and stretch them out, you're going to find resistance at about 30 degrees. So that's not anything to stress over if you find your baby has tightness at end range of hip. Oh, sorry, I forget you have the mouse. If you put a cloth over a newborn baby's face, they should avoid it. They usually avoid it first by just turning their head, and then you should also see some arm swiping. And of course, if you put a newborn in sit, they're not going to be able to hold themselves up, and they will just fold over completely at the hips. They also have, of course, they don't have the ability to hold their heads up. So that's pretty common knowledge, but we'll work through that a little bit more as we progress. But let's move past the neonate now and look at the, how do I progress, Shannon? At the 1-month-old, oh, here are some neonates. Very nice. So you can see in that top picture, those babies' bums are up in the air, and that's because they don't have full hip extension. So if you imagine that your hips can't fully extend even to neutral, then that bum is going to go straight up in the air, and the knees are going to get pushed down into the surface. They don't super love tummy time sometimes. You can see that little one is frustrated and crying, but he has moved his head to the side to clear his nose to breathe. So our newborns should be able to do that from the time they're born. Just avoid that nose down position and be able to slide their face on the surface like they're wiping their noses and move their head to the side so they can breathe.
Yep. Notice that because of this hip flexion, look at where all their weight is, right? All their weight is way high up on their chest and face. Okay, so it's a lot of work for them to turn their heads, but they have hip flexion contractures. All the weight's going to be up forward, and that is normal.
Also take a look at the baby in the white onesie. Look at those ankles. So what is normal ankle range of motion of a newborn? And that is what we consider to be complete. So if you take a newborn's, sorry baby, that wasn't a very nice way to pick you up. But if you take a baby's ankle and you're testing dorsiflexion range, they should actually hit the tibia with the dorsum of their foot. And that's again because of newborn positioning in the womb. So they're just in that tight flexed position, and so it just kind of pushes them into a lot of dorsiflexion. You can see that on the bottom baby's foot too, just at rest. Look at all that dorsiflexion. It's kind of amazing. Really cool stuff. That's a great picture of newborn positioning there. Lots of flexion. Head is not in midline. They can't hold that gigantic melon in the middle. That takes too much neck strength that they don't yet have. And their head in relation to their body, their head is about 1/3 of their total body. So if you think about if you had a head 1/3 the size of your whole body, how hard that would be to move on a teeny tiny neck. And that's sort of the experience of the newborn. We're gonna progress aside in just a second. There we go. Okay, so when we're looking at 1-month-olds, one of the great things about looking through these pictures is you can see my kids. So in the top picture, the little girl there is Bella as a baby, as a 1-month-old, sort of lopping over onto her friend. And this is what happens when we try and put 1-month-olds in sitting. They obviously are not going to hold themselves up. Their heads fall down onto their chest, and they kind of keep that physiologic flexed position. We don't expect there to be a big difference from neonate to 1 month. It's really only a matter of a couple weeks. But you see gravity as these babies are growing, hopefully gaining weight. Some of our babies aren't gaining weight, but hopefully they're gaining weight. And as they gain weight, it becomes harder and harder for them to maintain midline against gravity. So you see them starting to do a little more lopping over to one side or the other, and a little less flexion. Flexion at the elbows might be decreasing. You see with Bella in sitting that her elbows are a little less flexed there. And then you see Brayley in the bottom picture with he still has a lot of flexion as a 1-month-old. So he's still got a lot of flexion at the hips and knees, but you see a little less dorsiflexion than he would have had as a newborn. He's starting to get down to about a neutral dorsiflexion, which is nice. But again, we're not holding anything symmetrical really in the head there. Their heads are still way over to the side.
ATNR, real quick. ATNR as a reflex is it's gone by what, 4 months?
Yeah.
So the first 4 months that we're talking about, ATNR is probably the easiest reflex to see, one of the easier ones. And what that is it says that babies, when their head is rotated to the side, which it is because they cannot keep it in the middle yet, when their head is rotated to the side of their skull, it has flexion. The side of their face has extension. So a lot of times you'll see babies just laying down and they're in this asymmetrical kind of position. And you're like, oh, that's weird. If I was to slowly turn baby's head to the other side and I waited, you would probably see and should see flexion on the skull side and extension on that side, on the face side. So it's a typical reflex. You should see it in the first 4 months of life. You should not see it after 4 months of life. We'll talk about why, and you OTs can help us out here too because of what happens around 4 months. But think about intervention-wise, think about what does that do visually for the hands. So you've got head turned one direction, you've got eyes fixed on one hand. If baby has a torticollis or some muscle tightening on this side, and I'm only looking at one hand, I actually only realize I have one hand. My head has got to be able to turn to both directions so I can work on my hand and eye regard for each other, okay?
Because at this age, they're really not getting their hands together in the midline at all. Their head is also not maintaining midline unless they're being supported. So hand regard is super important. Okay. 2 months. So there's a picture on the top you see of a little guy showing us ATNR.
Yeah.
So there he is with his head over to the side. You see the skull side extremities are flexed and you see the face side extremities are extended. Now we call this a reflex. Not really sure that it's actually a reflex or just a response, but we're going to say that because of this response or this reflex, he is learning about that side of his body. So he is, like Shannon said, getting some good hand regard, learning that he actually has some fingers over there that he can make move, which is really cool. So at 2 months, this baby has now gained a significant amount of weight compared to his birth weight, but he hasn't been able to gain a ton of muscle yet. So he's working on muscle, but he can't keep up with that weight gain. So gravity is at a peak in its pull on this baby at about 2 months. So we see relative hypotonia. That's normal hypotonia. So we should see him just being more succumb to gravity, more stuck to the mat. And as you look at that top picture, you kind of see that. In fact, the bottom picture as well, where you can just see the effects of gravity. He's no longer in that super flexed position. He's sort of extending out and getting a little more extension. We're starting to follow a moving person with their eyes. So you can see in that top picture too, he's like, where are you? I'm following you with my eyes. I'm no longer sort of kind of glazing off into one direction. And if you happen to walk into my attention, now he's finding you with his eyes and fixing and following. Oh, I should go back to the 2 month really quickly in prone. The 2 month old in prone is not a super comfy position, but super, super important. So it's important for the 2 month old to start working on getting their head lifting further and moving their center of pressure further back towards their feet. And we'll go through that a little bit so you can feel, but remember, as that neonate and the 1 month old, all the weight was on face and chest. And at 2 months, because they're able to press a little bit more with their upper extremities and they're really working hard at getting their weight posterior, they're able to lift their head a little bit more and start stretching out those hips. Okay, 3 months. The 3 months are, the 3 month old is characterized by the beginning of symmetry. So we saw at 2 months, there was the max.
You guys already go? Yeah. Did your dad, where's the food, downstairs? Yeah. Okay. Your dad was calling you
as the 2 month old was super asymmetrical, showing a lot of ATNR posturing, the 3 month old is now much more symmetrical. They're starting for the first time to hold their head in midline in a variety of
He wanted you to take.
So if you put your 3 month old on their back, they can now hold their head in midline and even bring their hands together for the first time as long as they're supported on their chest. So they're not out here playing, but they can be here playing and get their hands together. And then they're now regarding not only do they have two hands and that they come together and make amazing things happen, but they also have a chest that is connected to them. So you'll see, yeah, we're gonna demo a little bit. So the 3 month old will have their hands together on their chest and their head in midline for the first time. Their feet also do some changing while they're here in the supine position. You'll see that feet come together with their soles facing one another. So it's kind of a frog-legged position, and you get a lot of abduction at the hips and external rotation. So this is as the baby is becoming more and more symmetrical. So their feet come together and you'll actually see toes play kind of like fingers as they regard that they have two toes and that they can make things happen when those feet come together. That's another really important piece in them later being able to accept sensory input onto the soles of their feet. So you could hypothesize sometimes that babies who have skipped this step and not really been able to play foot to foot might have more sensitive soles of their feet because they haven't really desensitized them together. In prone, a 3 month old is able to begin to lift their head off the surface and maybe also their upper chest, which is exciting. So what was preventing them before from lifting their head was really partly the hip flexion contracture. When your hips are flexed, it really pushes your weight forward onto your face. But the 3 month old has solved that problem by externally rotating and abducting their hips such that now they can lift their upper chest and head. Now they're lifting it not because they're pushing with their arms so much, although their arms may be placed beside them. It's really more extension of the neck and trunk as they're lifting up. They're not really effective yet at pushing down with their hands, but it's a good first step in that direction. And again, their head would be pretty symmetrical. This position of using sort of extreme neck extension and you'll see throughout the 3 month old, and it's typical. So you see kind of extreme neck extension in prone. It's not hyperextension, but there's a lot of extension there, but you'll also see it with chin jutting in sitting. So the 3 month old is really sick of their head blobbing around and not being able to control it. So now when you put a 3 month old in sit, they're gonna solve that problem by lifting up their shoulders and sort of hyperextending their neck a little bit so that they can place the back of their skull on their shoulders. So now they can hold their head up as long as they use their shoulders for support. This at 3 months is typical, and that's typical development. At any other month, we would be like, get those shoulders down. Let's lengthen your neck. Let's work on neck muscles and getting your scapula down and in the right place and not having this lifted or elevated shoulder blades. I know I'm moving quickly. Sorry, guys, I want to respect your time. 3 months is also a great place to start seeing typical movement. So up until this time when baby's moving, you'll see kind of this jittery, writhing movement. But by 3 months, you really want to see vigorous bats and kicks, more of a ballistic movement pattern. So that's like a hallmark that we want to see at 3 months to kind of check on their typical movement moving forward. And then they coo and chuckle, which is fun. And then finally, the month that we're going to cover today is going to be 4 months. So we're going to skip back and look at 4 months. Oh, look at my happy boy there. 4 months is defined by strong symmetry for the first time. So at 1 month, we had physiological collection. At 2 months, we had relative hypotonia. At 3 months, we had the beginning of symmetry. So they're starting to bring things together. And at 4 months now, we have strong symmetry. So let's look at a prone 4-month-old. A prone 4-month-old has now been working on getting those hips more past neutral, so they are able to actually put their elbows under their shoulders now and push effectively with their upper arms to get into that prone propped position. They should be lifting and even turning their head when they're in this prone position. Now, if a 4-month-old turns their head, and think about the weight of that head, depending on how they turn it, they may accidentally roll onto their side or into supine. So 4-month-olds accidentally rolling is a wonderful thing. They learn about cause and effect. They're learning about their weight shift, but they shouldn't necessarily, we shouldn't expect them to really be able to turn their head and not roll over, because they're just going to do it. We'll see them pushing with their arms, their legs, or you can see hips are more extended. They play with their toes. They may even work on getting more plantar flexion at their ankles, or be pushing with their toes and getting toe extension, which is another good range of motion activity while they're sitting here. While they're pushing with their hands and elbows, they're working on stabilizing those shoulder muscles and their shoulder girdle, as well as getting an elongated neck for the first time, because remember, our 3-month-olds were more like this. The 4-month-old is with their shoulder blades down, a little more extended, and also working for the first time really at using weight bearing in their upper extremity or in their hands. So we might be working on some hand arches and that sort of thing. I'm sure you OTs could teach me a lot about that. Okay, so let's look at supine 4-month-olds. We're going to help our 4-month-olds roll over into a supine position. And again, you'll see some strong symmetry. So a 4-month-old can now not only have their hands on their chest, but up in space. They can have them together up in space, and they can reach for those toys that are dangling up above their heads. So this is a great time to introduce those gyms that have baby toys that are hanging for babies to reach for and play with. If they turn their head to one side, you might also get another accidental roll. So kind of a neck riding response. So if they turn their heads, they might log roll over to that side just because the weight of their head and the tightness of their spine. Also in supine, baby may for the first time be able to reach and play with their knees while they're on the floor. So this is the first time baby can reach toward their knees and realize not only do I have 2 hands and a chest, but I have these amazing lower extremities that I'm starting to learn about. So they're starting to reach for and play with their knees. Awesome stuff. In sitting, a 4-month-old for the very first time might be, and this isn't a requirement of 4, but they might be starting to prop sit a bit. So if you place them in the right position, and if you help them place their hands and you let go, Shannon's going to be able to sit there for a little while, as long as she's not too vigorous. Now, if she sees something over to one side and gets interested, what's going to happen? Same thing as in supine and prone. She's going to do an accidental rollover. The nice thing with babies, as you can see in this picture of, oopsie, oh man, I'm not used to this mouse, that he has all this nice flexion. So if he's in sitting and he rolls over, he just sort of rolls over. It's not like us as adults that have all this length to deal with. As he turns over, he's just going to kind of roll and be back down into that supine position. With hands held, a 4-month-old can also stand. So up until this point, a baby has needed support at their chest to be able to stand. And now at 4 months, you can hold arms and hands, and baby should be able to hold themselves up. And then they laugh out loud, which is just such a joy. You get those good belly laughs for the first time. And as our speech therapist could tell us too, that the ability to laugh and do that sort of belly laugh is a pretty good indication of what's going on with their trunk as well, and their ability to hold those postural muscles. Because if we don't have postural muscles that are working well, we can't then project. We can't project loudly. So how are we on time? We have all of 7 minutes. So my thought is, why don't anybody who wants to can go through this with us, but we're going, do you want to do intervention? That's going up and going down? Maybe. Yeah.
Let's talk about that as we go.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay.
Yeah, so what we thought would be helpful is you have the information in terms of typical development. I would encourage you guys though, like YouTube babies, YouTube typical 2-month-old, 3-month-olds, 3-month-olds, 4-month-olds, because we work so often with kids who have special needs that sometimes we kind of lose perspective of, oh my gosh, they're actually doing that at 3 months? 3 months, are you kidding me? And we might see it in our kids much later. So YouTube some typical development, hang out with babies. I know it's hard to right now, so YouTube them. So as we go through, let's talk a little bit more about, let's say that we have a child, a neonate, and we know that the neonate should have physiological flexion. So we know that. So how are we going to help promote that, right? We're going to be talking with our families. We're going to be telling them, this is how you're going to promote it because this is what we would like to see. Okay, so on some of those itty bitty tiny babies. Okay. You can do physiological flexion a lot of ways. I'll start on some.
Yeah, go for it.
And then kick in. You guys also feel free to share a little bit. Well, maybe not. Maybe put it in the chat so everybody can see it since we're so short on time. Okay. Simple stuff that parents can do. Have them sit put their back against the couch, sit in a chair, do whatever they want to do if they're working with baby. But at a neonate, we should have a ton of physiological flexion. So this baby's knees are sewed a little funny.
Other one, abductum.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay, so you can use your own body, right? Parents can use their own body. Just tuck their feet up, okay? Get their arms up here together. Their head in the lap can be symmetrical, but know that it's typical for babies' heads to be asymmetrical. This is where we kind of want to keep an eye that although it is asymmetrical, do parents see their kids rotating their heads to both sides, or if they rotate it for them, can they fully rotate to both sides? We know they're not going to hold it in the middle, and that's fine, but they should have the range to do it, okay? Hands can be together, but you're looking for physiological flexion, okay? If parents want other strategies, take your towel roll, take your whatever it is, and we know that they're going to spend some time in a swing. They can't be held all the time, but roll something up. This is too wide, right? But that's what we have in the clinic. So you would take almost like a baby washcloth, you know, or a receiving blanket that's really thin, okay, and roll it up and just tuck it underneath the scapula, right underneath here, okay? So now I can be hands-free and you can just see how the arm is more positioned and just biased towards flexion and adduction, getting their hands here to their chest, okay? So you can add just a little bit of a hint that says, hey, hang out here. Don't be so far out here if you're a neonate, okay? Cool.
Okay, good.
What else? Okay, the 1-month-old. It's not that much different.
Yeah.
Okay, the neonate and the 1-month-old, we're pretty much doing the same stuff. We should be seeing pretty much physiological flexion. You should see that when they stretch, their hands open up when they stretch, and then they might come right back to physiological flexion. Okay, but you're going to see hand opening. We should see hand opening even in the neonate. Okay, not a lot of clench, clench, clench. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, no thumb in, right? So even if thumb is in, if they stretch, it comes out and then it might come back. Every once in a while, they might close on it. That's not a big deal. But if they're hanging on to it tight, then, you know, we want to keep an eye on that. Okay. 2 months.
Well, 1 month proning too. Every infant should spend time on their tummy. So I typically say, and I think maybe we have a little different, I mean, everybody's a little bit different in what they recommend, but I say throughout the day, try and get up to an hour and a half combined. But that can be baby on your chest. That can be baby on your legs. That can be during a diaper change, you roll to prone for a moment. That can be while you're carrying in a prone position. So I add all of that up to equal the hour and a half. And if baby is screaming and crying, they're not really learning. So we don't really force it. So we do whatever we can to make that enjoyable for baby. And yeah, just encouragement.
Just kind of like what Rhonda said, remember for your parents, like let's say that they have a G-tube or they've got something going on and parents are like, I just don't feel like I can. Are we lagging? We're good? Okay, cool. On our side, we're kind of roboto, we're lagging. Okay, so you can be in a reclined position. Okay, so if parents are like, I do not want them totally flat. Okay, not a big deal, no problem. Oops. Yeah. I'll hold the ball for you. So I can be here. And remember, my neonate can still be in that physiologic flex position, even if I'm reclined here. And they're still getting the nice effect of gravity pulling them down. And then as they get to 2 months, I might want those knees a little further out, right? And getting maybe the hands a little more out beside them as they mature a little bit more. And then encouraging them by talking, hey baby, we're gonna watch TV together? What should we do today? We're doing all of this to try and encourage baby to enjoy that position. Absolutely. Carrying and prone, all of that counts. All of that counts. And if they're up for it, I would encourage your parents to every once in a while, do like their kind of little baseline and put them flat on their tummy. A hard surface is gonna be easier for your baby than a soft surface. Okay, so if parents feel bad, tell them, you know, you're actually making it easier for your baby if you have like a mat on the floor or a little puzzle piece thing, whatever. If they're on the bed, it's gonna be harder for them to lift. Okay, they're gonna get all kinds of ground reaction forces through their arms and into their joints if they're on a firm surface than a soft surface. So encourage the firm.
So the other thing you can do, and helping with parents for the 2-3-month-olds, so lift that head and get a little more hip extension, my leg out of the way, is by helping them to shift their weight back into their pelvis. So baby tends to be this way, right? So especially in that neonate, or if they haven't stretched out their hips yet, all the weight, as you can see, is going down into head and upper chest. And that's not a comfortable place to be. Any of you who've done that, that doesn't feel great. So instead, what I'm going to do is encourage that weight shift through the pelvis into the surface so that baby then has less weight on their head and neck and can lift up on their own.
Absolutely. And sometimes you can just tell parents, just even rest your hand on their tush. And sometimes that's enough. It's just a little bit of like an anchor, a little bit of a weight shift that you're bringing it down towards their bums. And then they're gonna be able to lift up a little bit, their head a little bit easier. Same sort of a thing when we tell parents to roll up something and put it underneath their basically across their nipple line, is that all you're doing is you're shifting the weight backwards, right? You're giving weight off of the chest towards the bum, which is gonna allow them to lift. So you can try it in different strategies. Okay, easy stuff. One note to say, this is going to be your neonate, right? Or your infant, or I mean your tiny baby, let's say. So the roll that goes underneath the nipple line, their elbows still need to be touching the surface. So it's not super helpful to have a huge roll and baby's kind of out there swimming around. You want it to be a thin enough roll that elbows are still in touch with the surface so that they can push on the surface and get those ground reaction forces in through their joints and body, okay? So over a boppy pillow for a neonate is not gonna work for this. It's gotta be something thin that gives a little subtle, like, hey, put your weight back here, but still push on the surface. Okay, 4 months, 3 months.
We didn't do a ton of 2, but some nice things for 2 is if you're thinking about typical development of a 2-month-old, we'll talk quickly. And
you guys can go anytime. It's 12:48.
Oh, geez.
We're recording this.
So, is that one hand regard, so they should be in that asymmetrical position. So placing toys within reach of that one arm that's out so that they can swipe for toys is a nice activity for a 2-month-old.
Yep. Toys, yeah. So OTs, you guys already know this, but right, Palmer grass it comes in, we'll see it. It's one of those most wonderful things for bonding. You put your finger there and baby squeezes on and it's awesome, it's wonderful. But we do need for it to go away because we need grasp and release, right? So by 4 months, Baby is swatting at toys. Baby might get something in their hand. This is where on some of the testing, it'll say, place a toy in their hand and they grasp it for 10 or 15 seconds. This is really looking at, do they have a strong reflex? This is a really early testing item that looks, yes, they have a strong reflex. They're not intentionally onto this because they love this toy, but they can put it in the palm and the grasp reflex is there. At 4 months, yes, hands are up in space, okay? If baby can't reach up in space, you have options to help them get there. We can do a variety of things. Yeah, you can do the same sort of a thing with the towel roll. Just slip it right underneath the scapula, right under that direction, so that the scapula is able to kind of protract around, that the hands are more biased to come in towards the middle. If that's not enough, then stay as proximal to the body as you can and go to the shoulders. And maybe baby needs a little bit of help there. And then if that's still not enough, go to the elbows. Do a little bit more and more, but start with just giving a suggestion, see if they can then kind of activate a little bit better. Yes. I'm guessing. Are we doing something? Well, or if they're reaching, if they were reaching up and you were having a hard time.
Yes, I just didn't know if you were
side lying is awesome. Yeah. Side lying is awesome, 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 right? So let's say that baby is also having a hard time reaching up against gravity. Start in side lying. Their hands are already together. Okay. And then you can help them kind of stay together and come to the middle. Hands are now together. You might have to support shoulders, bimanual activities kind of coming in at you, that kind of a thing. Okay. Good stuff. Okay. The only other thing, well, there's so many things we could talk about. Do you guys have any questions? Anything you want to ask specifically? We'll just keep throwing out ideas. Is that good? We'll just keep jibber jabbering. Go when you need to. What time is it? It's 12:51. Okay. Anything else that's major that we really want to talk about? Maybe prone. Okay, yeah, prone for 4 months. We'll go prone 4 months. Okay, the 4-month-old, this is where elbows are under shoulders. Okay. And Ron's going to demo beside baby. Okay, so elbows are under shoulders. So now all of a sudden, holy Toledo, you have, so think about physiological flexion. You've got abs that are kind of tightened together, let's just say. It starts opening up. Now you're in prone at 4 months, and you can see that she's stretching out her abs. She's using her extensors. Her shoulder girdle is getting some nice work. Be dynamic in this position when you have your baby here. Shift them back and forth. You know, think about all the work that's happening there. You know, definitely through that. So you can see now the weight is down at her pelvis. Okay, all of that, her upper chest and her back are up off the floor. Okay. Yeah.
The more we do typical, the more we'll see atypical. So here we are 2 months.
Okay, that's 2 months. It's horrible. Their weight isn't for us, but their weight is on their kneecaps and their upper chest and face. Okay, not fun. 3 months, they solve the problem of hip flexion by externally rotating, right? So she still doesn't have total hip flexion, like she's not using hip extension. Excuse me, sorry, total hip extension. But she externally rotated her legs to solve the problem. And in doing so, it got her weight down closer to her butt and she can lift her head. She's not using a lot of arms though. It's her neck and her upper back. That's what's really doing the work, okay? 4 months, now her neck can elongate again. Her shoulder blades are down. She's pushing in through the floor, okay? Lots of fantastic like closed chain stuff, right? So
and notice really through cool. All of these positions, there's been no trunk rotation.
Yeah. Babies don't rotate their trunk until they're about 6 months old. Okay, so everything in the beginning is all sagittal plane. It's all flexion extension. We don't get lateral flexion necessarily because it's mostly log rolling. You might see it a little bit, but it's pretty much sagittal plane only until 6 months. We are not going to rotate our babies' trunks until they're 6 months old. okay? Because we don't see it in typical development. It's not happening in typical development until later.
And that tightness kind of hurts. So
Yeah.
think about how the 4-month-old accidentally rolls, and that accidental roll happens because they have tightness in their trunk. So if they have it all stretched out such that they have all this rotation available, their body isn't going to come with them when they accidentally roll their head to one side. So we want that body to actually accidentally roll in the 4 months, 3, 4 month, 5-month ages.
Yes. Okay, and that was an absolute quick version of neonate to 4 months. Great job, guys.
Thanks for being here.
We'll do, are we doing next Wednesday?
We'll do next
Yeah, we'll do next Wednesday. We'll go from 4 months to 6 months probably. Just so we have time. It's 30 minutes, and then a lot of fun things start to happen between 4 and 6 months. We'll see if
the best.
Yeah. So we'll continue on this little series for a little while. We'll get all the way through 12 at bare minimum and see what we want to go from there, okay? Thanks for hanging out for lunch. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.